Welcome to another episode of the Drew Aversa Show. Today I have my guest, Dr. Jaseon Outlaw. Dr. Outlaw, how are you?
Doing pretty good, Drew. I appreciate you inviting me on. I'm certainly looking forward to having a fruitful discussion about whatever it is that you have on the plate. And so looking forward to it today.
Hey, we're just having a great conversation about life and start out. I always love to hear about, your journey. You are a clinical psychologist in California
Hmm.
with a practice called Journey of Life, which I just love the name
Sure,
because it
sure.
truly is a journey in life, as you and I have both shared some stories.
Mhm.
So yeah, I just love to turn it over to you to just kind of share your journey. How did you get to where you are? And then for the audience, just to stay tuned, we're going to be talking about, how to manage during some challenging times and, what to look for when you're trying to find help and how to get help, because a lot of people might be new to, asking for help during these times. So definitely looking forward to a great conversation today.
Sure. Just in terms of my journey of how I got to where I am. First of all, born and raised in Oakland, California, so I'm a proud Oaklander. And I did my education in a couple of different states, and so I found myself in Arizona and Louisiana and Texas and Indiana, bouncing around for different reasons related to obtaining the ultimate goal. But after I completed my postdoc, which was at University of Houston, I made a decision to move back to California and provide services to my community. That was always my goal, and I feel like I've achieved that. Now, certainly, I'm one of many therapists in this area, but many people know who I am and about the clinic. I have also done some work with the county, so I was the chair of the Alameda County Mental Health Board. I've also worked on the Measure A committee, so just trying to put my stamp on things. And ultimately, my goal and kind of or one of my goals is to reduce stigma, right? Like mental health, people get deathly afraid of even the concept of mental health. They think that everyone is severely mentally ill and on, high medication and have very little control over their behaviors and their thoughts. And while that definitely does describe part of the mental health population, most of it doesn't look like that. And so it's kind of my goal is to continue to break down the walls of stigma and dispel myths and just provide information that gets people to understand kind of what it really is. So, once again, to kind of answer your question, as I got back to California and was studying for licensure exams and so forth, I made a decision that I was not going to work for someone else. I said, you know what? I'm going to try this out myself and hang a shingle, as we say, and open up the door and see kind of who falls in. And oddly enough, Drew, I got lucky. I'm going to tell you why I got lucky is because when I first started, Affordable Care Act hadn't started yet. It was a theory, and certainly, healthcare reform in this country has been a discussion for many, many moons and many, many presidents. So prior to Affordable Care Act, I used to have clients who would say, "Look, I don't have insurance. Can you accept $25? Can you accept $20? Can you be seen? Can I be seen for free?" And that was like not everyone, but it was probably 40, 50%. And we had just started, and so we were like, "Well, it's better to take $25 than $0. If we don't take this client, we're going to be doing nothing this hour." But slowly but surely, Affordable Care Act came in, and it just insured many more millions of Americans. And the population that we serve began to come in with insurance. And to this day, I very, very rarely have someone who doesn't have insurance, whether it's, Cover California or something else. And so that just created a lot of access to care, right? And I feel like even part of the discussion about stigma has a little bit to do with access to care. So if you don't have health care, why would you consider seeing a therapist, right? Like all you're going to do is just disappoint yourself unless you can get someone to accept a small sliding scale fee. So I think certainly stigma is real, but I do feel as if the access to care piece was another part of it. So nonetheless, as things kind of sprouted, I was able to build the business, and we see about 100, 115 a week now, and we serve everywhere from San Francisco all the way to Fremont.
Wow. And has your practice changed quite a bit with COVID right now as far as telehealth? and how people are accessing care?
Sure, sure. Telehealth is our savior. And so, if we didn't have telehealth, and just to briefly describe it for the listeners and viewers, telehealth is basically just anything that's not face to face. And so, telephone and video are the primary versions of telehealth. And so, we would see, I think I had one telephone client when prior to, March 2020, and now I don't see anyone in person, and neither does anyone in my office. It just isn't really worth it until, to expose all the different clients who would be coming into the office to folks. Same thing with families. And so we just made a decision to completely transition over to telehealth. And it has a few cons to it, but for the most part, it's not a huge shift. And people are still able to be seen. We notice that clients are like, wait a minute, this is more flexible for me. I don't have to drive 20 minutes to you, do my hour, and then drive another 20 minutes. They kind of lose 3 hours, right?
Well, yeah, Bay
So
Area rush hour, you're trying to get to an appointment, possibly if you're working and have an accommodation to go to therapy,
for sure, for sure.
it
And
could be a 3, 4 hour chunk of your day.
that is very true. And I can recall a San Francisco client that I had who just had the worst time ever making it to therapy on time. And I was like, look, we're going to have to do something different here, refer you guys somewhere else, because your appointment's at 4 o'clock and you get there at 4:35. There's only with so much that can be done. And I hate to see you sitting in traffic. So to answer your question, once again, telehealth has hugely changed the landscape, and it has allowed us to continue to serve our clients.
In one of the presentations I do for first responders and even corporate on the trauma awareness and whatnot, just to, share my journey too, is, going through different traumatic injuries and things throughout my life. Trauma impacts so many people and life traumas, right? I mean, you could, in a sense, we don't think of these things, just the context, like you say, the way things are framed in society, that,
Mhm.
you have an amazing career and then all of a sudden it's gone because of COVID, the pandemic, the last recession. These things can
Sure.
be traumatic, let alone our own physical traumas,
Mhm.
emotional, psychological trauma, different things like that. So when somebody's trying to find a therapist for the first time, that can also be somewhat traumatic, right? If
Oh,
you
of
don't
course.
fit, it's like, I always say it's like dating, in the workshops I do to
It is.
help managers become more aware on these things, because sometimes you have to coach somebody in a corporate setting of, hey, here's the EAP, or this is how you can get, access to somebody better. If it's not working, don't give up, right?
Mhm.
So what is your advice? I mean, some therapists offer maybe a half hour connecting, to get to see if there's a fit, right? I mean, what should that journey look like for somebody when they're in a state where they realize they're not okay,
Mhm.
they know they need help, and then how do they make sure that it's the right fit versus going to one therapist perhaps and just giving up, right? I know for
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
I didn't give up, I kept going. But
yeah.
what's your advice from actually being an entrepreneur, a practice owner, a business owner, a therapist, you know, how does it look in your seat, for trying to
Sure,
find the
sure,
right fit for the client where you can give value to somebody?
sure. I think you raise a really good point. And my initial response is, this is the same with any service provider. It can be an attorney, it can be someone who's cutting your hair or doing your nails. Any service that's being provided, you don't have to just stop at the first person and see that one first person as completely representative of the field, right? Anytime, and you and I both don't have to get our haircuts anymore, but I do recall I haven't got my haircut since 2009. I remember it very much like it was yesterday, and the liberation feels great. But
It feels great,
nonetheless,
but I think razor blades are more expensive than haircuts. That's another conversation for
this
another
is
day.
true. The high quality ones, at least. But when we were getting haircuts, you didn't stop at the first barber you went to and say, this is, the greatest thing ever. You'd make a decision based on a couple haircuts and say, all right, well, I'm gonna try somebody else. So the same thing is certainly true with therapists. And I like to tell all my clients, and I encourage my therapists to do the same. Let them know, like, this is a trial period. Like, after 2 or 3 sessions, you're gonna get a pretty good idea of how I work. You're gonna get an idea of if it feels as if I can connect and understand your worldview. You're going to get an idea of if I feel like I'm going to be an effective person to be the engine behind the change that you're looking for. And after a couple sessions, if you don't feel that, then I personally recommend that you try someone else. Sometimes a gender match is a huge thing, or sometimes an ethnicity match from client to therapist is a huge thing, or sometimes just an SES match. There's all sorts of different aspects of our personal and social identities that are going to be important that you take into consideration. So my advice to the people listening and watching is just pretty much to look at your first experiences with any therapist you choose as a trial period, and don't feel bad. Don't feel like you're hurting someone's feelings if you need to try something else.
No, that's great, and it's great coming from you too, because I think people, might feel bad, right? There's always that hierarchy in a sense where we see, I think, in American society where the MBA might know more than this person, or the
Hmm. Hmm.
PhD knows more than the MFT, or that, and I think that's great coming from you. Don't feel bad about hurting that person's
For
feeling
sure.
if it's
For
not the
sure.
right
Yeah,
fit.
yeah. It's about you and the reason why you're there. And I'll say this on record too, is that there are licensed master's level clinicians who are way better than some PhD clinicians. Just because you got the PhD doesn't mean that that means that you're a great provider. And I can just remember some of my professors were really good at teaching and they were really good at research, but seeing them as a therapist, they sucked, right? So you got to figure out kind of what your niche is in terms of what you're going to do. Now, luckily, that a doctorate degree in psych is a little bit robust. You can teach, you can write books, you can do the therapy thing, you can do lots of things, and so you're not limited to one area. But certainly, I would encourage everyone to not see just a degree as like the method of determining who's going to be good for you or not, right?
No, that's great. And then one thing, in the world of therapy too, there are different therapies now today too, like somatic experiencing, EMDR.
Mm-hmm.
Can you touch a little bit on that too, where if somebody, has trauma in different aspects, why one may be better than the other, right? Because I mean, we're human. We're not a one size fits all approach through that journey of life. At different
For sure.
stages of counseling, there may be different needs or different modalities that are or more better than the other.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll say this first. One of the common factors that makes therapy work is really the relationship that you have with your therapist. Is this a trusting relationship? Is this someone who you can be vulnerable with? Is this someone who is genuine and transparent with you as a therapist as well? That's like the it, if the therapist can fulfill those prerequisites, you're doing pretty good. And then from there, the interventions are kind of icing on the cake. And I'm not saying that interventions don't have any place in terms of outcome, but you can be the best interventionist in the world and not establish any trust and rapport, and that's out the door, right? So you need to have that piece first. But in reference to trauma work, I mean, there's a lot of different types of treatments out there. Even just the exposure version can be very helpful. Some people need medication, some people need EMDR, and there are lots of other treatments that are out there that are helpful as well. And so for the average consumer, they don't necessarily know, well, what do I need? What's going to be helpful for me? I do think just a peripheral sort of internet search and understanding what each of the treatments are like, and you making a decision like, okay, I think that really fits for me. For some people, EMDR is like hokey. It's almost like, waving the stopwatch and doing the hypnosis that way. And hypnosis actually is a real thing too. It doesn't look like what the movies show, but certainly
I,
it's
I
a
did
real
it. It
thing.
actually worked well.
For sure.
For me, I mean, it's amazing some of these things. Yeah,
But what works for you may not work for someone else. And so it's
absolutely.
just very important that we all know ourselves and know what may feel like, all right, that's something that I think aligns with what I think is going to be helpful. So I feel like I'm rambling a bit. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, that's great. And then something, nowadays, Oakland is an amazing community. It's very diverse. Obviously, we're seeing, gentrification now. We're seeing, You and I talked about the challenges, with foreign investors coming in, buying up, properties with all cash offers, displacing hardworking locals.
Yep.
So there's a lot of pain right now in different areas of life, in a sense of, I can't afford to live in a place that I have called home my whole life, right? Or,
Mm-hmm.
I'm uncertain if I can even buy a home or have the American dream, and I'm working the grind of the American, capitalism work ethic that you and I talked about, where other
Yep.
countries actually work less than us.
Sure.
So how can people manage all of these different inputs of stress, of worry, of uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
of not feeling like there might be light at the end of the tunnel? Because I think with the media cycle, we see on the news, it's constantly negative.
Sure.
It's not very promising. And even when there is something good, it seems like the next day the news comes on and slashes out all the good. And now there's a new variant of COVID. One day after
Sure.
the vaccine, it's like the news just can't rest, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
people are in this fear cycle. What's your advice for people to get through this next year? In a healthy way, in a happy way, in a way that is uplifting to them.
Sure, sure. Well, the first thing is, in reference to the news and what's put on TV, this kind of is an extension of the pre-conversation we had about capitalism. So, news stations and their ratings are based on how many people are watching. And the honest reality is that the more that you can keep people stuck to a TV, the better ratings they have, and the more they can ask for commercials and so forth. And so, guess what? What does one of the best in terms of keeping people glued to a TV? Fear, right? So if you're fearful of something, oh my God, I don't know how I can catch COVID, if it's getting better, or so forth and so on. Fear sparks this need for more information, right? So you will be more glued to the TV. And I'm generalizing, of course. This
Can you
doesn't.
say that one more time? Because that's a powerful point for people to take
Yeah,
home.
yeah. Just the whole concept of TV and news stations and the different stations that we watch, they want to have better ratings, right? So they want to have more people watching. And so, how do you achieve that? One of the best ways to achieve that is to spark fear. So, by sparking fear, it creates this feeling of I need to know all the information that I can so that I feel more equipped and more prepared, right? And so it's just as if, I'm quite sure there was an organizational psychologist at some point that, consulted with a news station and said, this is what you need to do. So it is a little, immoral, I guess, if you really want to put it that way. But we have to all be aware of, for one, if you're going to be sitting in front of the TV all day, you need to know what's happening here. You have no idea that part of what they're doing is trying to spark fear in you. Then you can fall victim to thinking that this is completely representative of all that's out there. And here's kind of how you know that that's the case. So during periods where COVID is really bad, it's front page news and it's every, the top of the news stations articles and so forth. But when it does better, you don't hear anything about it. You don't hear about COVID as much. You may hear a little snippet here and there, but it's in the middle of the show. It's not like, front page news at that point. So, because comfort doesn't create ratings, right? Any sort of positive sort of notion, oh, I feel really comfortable in my city and things are going well around here. Well, I'm going to turn to Netflix and watch a movie now. So, we are certainly being their psychology and organizational sort of development stuff being used to keep us stuck to the TV. But let me answer your question, because what you said is, or what you asked is, what can we do to stay sane during this period of time? So we're coming up on year number 2. In other words, we've been in COVID for a year. What I've been advising people, and especially since we are coming up on a year anniversary, you can't wait uh, until you feel as if COVID ends to do the things that make you happy. If you are putting yourself on pause, and you're waiting, all right, when COVID is over and done with, I'm gonna, go out and do X or Y, whatever hobbies that I have and so forth. I'm not suggesting like go out and just be unsafe, but you have to do some form of what makes you happy with the understanding that this isn't the epitome of that. Let's say you like to play basketball, right? You're in a rec league and everything else. Probably not safe to go out and play contact sport with people, but does that mean that you can't go out and shoot a basketball with you and your friend? No, you can definitely do that. Does that mean that you can't, in your backyard, work on your dribbling? So my whole point is that it's not going to represent, the epitome of what was fun for you with that respect. But if you are waiting until this thing is completely over, it's going to make this period even more tough for you. So I'm strongly encouraging people to not wait, to figure out kind of what it is that that ticks makes them tick, and do that. The other piece that's really important is you got to be creative, right? And so I'm speaking to people who are still staying safe and they're at home. You go out and you do your grocery thing and maybe you get some exercise, but you're still spending more hours in the house with family. So get really creative. And I've recommended, I'm picturing in my mind like the two-parent household with a couple kids, right? You got some young kids and they're like pulling their hair out because they're bored out of their mind. How about doing a treasure hunt at home? And how about doing a cooking contest where you involve the kids and ask the kids, what's your favorite meal? What do you want to cook? I'm gonna be your partner. Mom's gonna be your sister's partner, and we're gonna have a cook-off and we're gonna rate and see who made the best meal. And so, of course, that requires you got to go to the grocery store. You got to figure out, all right, what are we going to do to make this mac and cheese? Because kids are going to choose mac and cheese. What are we going to do this to make it unique? Put some lobster in it or what have. So my whole point, I'm just using that as an example, but my point is that we have to get creative. And if you don't, you find yourself not able to buffer the stress of COVID by doing even just some of those things I just recommended. It makes it a little bit easier. It's not going to solve all your problems, but definitely is going to make it a little bit easier with respect to enduring this piece, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. And to take it to the next thing, you and I talked about the challenges right now too with the country is just so polarized, right? I mean, if you look at us from the outside, right? I'm white, you're black,
Mhm.
but you and I both know each other on a totally different level.
Sure.
You saw the side of me that was extremely vulnerable
Mhm.
when we first met, when I was advocating on stuff for first responders, sharing my story, the pain that I went through, harassment, different things that I've been through that if you just look at me from the outside and take that at face judgment, right? Or we take, somebody like yourself in a sense, and we just look at the outside. We're so polarized right now. How do we get past that? Because we're seeing, labels right now of white supremacy, right? So I know white people that feel terrible right now, where they're really good people. They're in the community. They're doing
Mhm.
amazing work for underserved organizations. They're doing
Mhm.
different things. So granted, our country has not done things the right way and has taken way too long to evolve in so many different ways. But I don't think that makes everybody, a racist, whether you're black,
Sure.
and you're opposed to white people, or you're white
Sure.
and
Sure.
you say XYZ. It
Mhm.
just seems like there's just so much gasoline on everything nowadays, and waiting for
There
that
is.
match to
Yep.
just kick a big flame to damage somebody's reputation in 2 seconds, and we don't even know that person. How do we
Mhm.
get to an America where we can tackle these issues of race, we can tackle the issues of systemic injustices and different things like that both you and I care deeply about, at the same time not damaging each other, not damaging the good people, because we know there's
Sure. Sure.
people that are brought up psychologically in very unhealthy ways, but we know that there's so many good people in the process that end up becoming collateral damage,
Of
possibly
course.
psychologically
Of course.
through this division. So how do we heal, rather than hate?
Yeah, well, my first response to your question, it kind of goes back to what we mentioned a moment ago. And so, post, the previous administration's role in this country, certainly the insurrection is on people's minds and the effects of that, and how many other people are out there who are willing to go there So it goes back to that piece that I mentioned about news stations sparking fear, right? So it could be a small segment, 5% or 3%, but by them putting those images over and over on TV, it sparks fear. And I don't necessarily think it's news stations' goal to spark fear. It's just their goal to get the ratings by any means necessary, and particularly like the really hard hitting sorts of stations. And so I think insight is key, right? And understanding, I think we all, if you're halfway intelligent, you would understand that everyone you run across is not calling you a name and doesn't feel that way about you. It'd be nice if there were other media outlets that did cover things a little bit more fairly and gave a better idea of how pervasive certain problems we have in society are. But same thing, that doesn't give you ratings, so you're not going to see much of that. So I'm just encouraging insight and, clearly have conversations with people, volunteer and do your work, and I can guarantee you that the more that you're not sitting at home just watching TV, you're going to see like, well, they try to they try to say like this is just going to come and hit me in the face, every time I walk out the house, but I haven't seen that and I haven't experienced that, and so there's a discrepancy between my experience and what's been said. Above and beyond that, I just would, let everyone know that, kind of as you mentioned, people come from colorful backgrounds, and people become racist, sexist, xenophobic, all the isms for reasons that they were brought up, right? Like it's not like you're born to hate people. Now, sometimes people hate people based on their direct experience, and they're generalizing now. You get beat up by an Asian guy, and now you're hyper vigilant of Asian people, and then you just develop some philosophies based on that. That does happen too, but for the most part, these are taught behaviors. This isn't anything that people learn. I mean, you can very clearly see babies play together no matter what what size and color and all the rest of that. They all play together. And it's also interesting in the recent news that there's been violence against Asian people. And I'm not sure how much of that is new and how much of that is just getting kind of media attention at this point. But chances are there probably are some people who have some deep rooted feelings about whether they feel Asian people were the cause of them losing their job and the current situation they're in, or if they feel as if Asian people are taking over this country. And so there's probably a mix of all that, and we have to be careful. And it's my personal philosophy, and I know everybody doesn't follow this, but the love your neighbor like you love yourself is like the core, and that's the start of it all. And so it can be hard to love someone who has wronged you in some way, and it can be hard to not say, all right, this was my experience with this person, but guess what? Everyone who looks like this person isn't that person. It can be difficult to not come to that conclusion, but I think we all have to take a personal responsibility to do our own work and introspection and understanding kind of what makes us have the thoughts and feelings that we do, right?
Absolutely. And I think too, kind of separating what the government does from a policy standpoint
Mm-hmm.
does not mean that your neighbor believes in that,
True, true. Yeah.
because we know through our political process how a lot of people get elected is through big corporations, through big political interests, but that may not mean that your actual neighbor, your community, the people right next to you have those same values. Those are political values that unfortunately have, I think, gotten, like you say, with media, it might not have been the original intention, but now it's just we have to really look at intention. What is the intention? What are the incentives, behind some of these things, and then how do we change it? Because I agree with you. When you're born, yeah, you do watch children. They're so their intuition is amazing when you listen to a child speak, and then somehow, some way, we get older in these bigger shells and these bigger bodies, and we lose that
Sure,
simplicity.
sure. Yeah, children for the most part are they tend to come rather like a sponge. They're taking in information, and that they are pure and innocent at that point, and they tend to be happy. And depending on the environment, that can certainly change things. And people have anger and deep rooted sort of emotional scars for a number of reasons. And many times it doesn't have anything to do with the recipient of that anger. It has something to do with that person. So, you know, just briefly, road rage, you know, is one of those displaced anger sort of situations. It's not about you. I mean, there's one thing if you get into a full accident and, you know, all right, you're pissed off about that. But many times road rage is like the avoidance of an accident. So we did not get into an accident, yet you are upset enough at me to want to beat me up and shoot me. Like that makes no sense. And if everyone just needs to realize, like, this is how I get out of letting people get me upset, is I will say to myself, that person got a whole lot going in their life, and I could have been me, anyone else, the same response would have been the case, just because I'm in their mind an easy target right now to displace their emotions onto. So it's just one of those things where we go through a lot in life, and it can help us to become a bigger, better person, or we can end up becoming a hateful person. And unfortunately, we see a little bit of both, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then kind of, with the future, right? The future is maybe a year out or so. We heard President Biden in the town hall. He said, things probably aren't going to go back to the same, till the end of this year or maybe into next year. So, companies are, I think, finally accepting reality. There was a lot of uncertainty last year, and people want to get back into the office and all this. And when I was advising, executives, I said, hey, it's just plan on being remote for at least another year or two. I mean, this is a major pandemic. It's something
Sure.
we haven't seen in years like this. So, what is your advice for companies and for leaders to make that transition healthy for their employees when they're coming back? Because we know a lot of employees have social anxiety. They've been cooped up now away from human interaction in many cases
Mhm.
for a year. And this is something we haven't seen really in our, maybe you go through a bad injury like I went through and you're kind of out of the loop for a year doing rehab, physical therapy, but you still can go down to the corner restaurant and go hang out and have a burger, right? I mean, it's just so different right
Yeah.
now. So these people that are, they need a job, and then the boss says, "Hey, you got to come back
Mhm.
now," and
Yeah.
then the person's going, "I'm terrified right now." What are some things that employers can do to make it not psychologically damaging and a smooth
Yeah.
transition for people coming back?
Well, my initial thought about that is there's going to have to be some sensitivity on the part of employers, right? And I feel like a lot of what we talked about today is about money, and it's about, we talked about ratings and so forth, which is about money. And so, in the eyes of some employers, if you don't get seats in the butts in the seat on certain positions, they're not making as much money, right? The company isn't going to make as much money. And of course, there are certain fields and certain jobs where, you have to sell a product, somebody has to be there. But we're talking more of like the jobs where all you really need is an internet connection, a computer, and a phone. So I think that the more successful companies are going to have at least a hybrid version of telecommute and working, maybe a few days out of the week in the actual office. And I think that the more successful companies are going to be the ones that are likely to be willing to go full out telecommute. And you're going to see, I think we will as a country, we're going to see the effects of that pretty easily. And, I personally think it's going to be Google and Apple and some of those major companies that are going to lead the way. And if we're seeing that they are in fact still making billions of dollars, despite people working from home, hopefully that'll be incentive enough for employers to say, look, our bottom line isn't completely contingent upon people coming in or not. And so I'm hoping that I'm accurate in that. And the honest reality, Drew, is that there's going to be some employers, it doesn't matter what you tell them, they're going to require people, mandate people to be there. And natural, I don't know what anyone's business to do bad, but chances are high that those companies are not going to be the ones that are creating positive work-life balance and making people feel comfortable. And so it's very possible that those companies don't do as well. So we'll see. But I certainly, I'm encouraging all the employers who are watching to have some sensitivity and know that this isn't about people trying to get over on the system. This is about people being worried about their families. And the hope also is that during that period that we see coronavirus numbers plummet, and that people do start to feel more comfortable, and that, they can align at the same time, then we be in a good place, right?
Dr. Outlaw, fantastic having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me and
Sure.
sharing your advice and leadership in the mental health space.
I appreciate you having me again, Drew. Thanks for the discussion here.